These are the replacement dial glass. These are 3/8 thick plate glass. They are 48 or 47 and 5/8 inch in diameter with an 1 5/8 hole in the center for the dial gear assembly. All I have left to do on these, and I'm in this kind of weather, I'm scared to hardly even touch them. But they need to be frosted, and then the numerals applied to them, which is not a long process. These are the new hands. They are sugar pine, and which is what was the originals. And luckily, we were able to get just one pair, but that was good enough, of the originals. This is amazing. This hand is 130 years old, and this is why I use this material, is because of how well these have done. Anyway, it was a nice pattern to use for that. Did a preservation on the piece behind to hold the counterweights and rods were all gone, so I made those out of brass, and so these hands are perfectly balanced now, which is very important in the operating of the clock. The other parts over here, these are what's called the part of the motion works, or the dial gear assembly. This part right here is where the dial glass goes, and this part is on the outside of the building, and this is on the inside, and this is what relays the time to the hands. You see this shaft is turning it will turn one time every 12 hours. This one turns one time every hour. So these have all been the preservation on all of these. Normally these are in real bad shape. They're what gets most of the weather and just a filthy. And these were bad. These were filthy, but the gears were all intact. This is all the universal joints, except for what I have on the clock. There was some that I had to use for the display purposes. These are the bushings for the bell hammer. This is all the pulleys. This one didn't have any paint on it, and you can see where someone years ago had welded or brazed this, and at the time they must have stripped the paint off that pulley. This is one of mine. This was part of the job, was to come up with a crank to wind the weights. So this is one that came off of a Seth Thomas tower clock. This is the piece that the weights stack on, and then originally there was a cable that hooked onto here, and this would have been on the time side. The strike side is still in the building. And it had a stack of weights on it. Well, actually one weight. It was that tall. We couldn't get it out of the weight chute. It was so heavy. These are the original dial shafts, and a lot of times they were made out of metal. Very few times you see them where they're wood, but they were all cleaned. All these real good. Has the universals on the ends, and this is kind of different how they did these with the brass fittings on those. This is an extension for the cables to run the bell. This is a couple of the cables. You had one that ran down the clock, and because the bell was offset from where the clock was striking at, this would have hooked to the clock, and then this went across the ceiling above the clock, and then the other side hooked to here and went straight up to the bell, or to the hand. This is the winders that I built. Got one for each side, and I tried to make them as close to what original Seth Thomas winders were. A lot of this style is what they had. These are the original weights. We wanted to use anything that we could original off the clock, and these are the original strike side weights. Because of the way that we go through the gearing, you don't need as many of them to have the same amount of power to run the bell. Used a switch down here, which as the weight goes down, it will energize this switch and automatically wind these weights. This is a safety feature on the bottom. If the power would ever go out and the weight comes down, if there isn't something to hold it up, it will end up slumping over and ends up, it possibly will damage this switch or this rod. So if the power is out, it just come down nice slowly and just lay on here until the power comes back on. Then also, I put a safety switch on the top, so if anything would ever happen to this switch, the weight comes up and will hit that switch and just automatically shut it off. So we've got, what I try to do is conceal the wiring as well as I can. There's wires kind of running everywhere, and try to make it so that they're not any more noticeable. This is the time side winder. It's built just like the one on the Strike, except that this one doesn't work near as often. This one only winds about once every 16 hours or so. It's kind of how I've got it timed out. But it is basically the same setup. I've got two weights on this side as well, which is plenty of power to run this clock and the three dials. Once it goes back into the tower, for now it's plenty to run what I have here. This is all heavy duty parts. Used a Baldar industrial motor, and this is a very heavy duty, actually heavier duty gear reduction box than what was on the original Seth Thomas's, but it's just I think necessary. Hi, I'm Phil Wright of the Tower Clock Company. This is a preservation that I've just finished. This is a number 16 Seth Thomas that it belongs to the Hennepin County Commissioners, and it came out of the headquarters building at Fort Snelling, and I did a complete preservation on it. It had a lot of mechanical issues, some pieces that were actually missing. I don't know how they kept the thing running. This rating nut was gone. These little blocks that pinch the suspension spring, they were missing. I had to make a new suspension spring. The pilot dial was missing. This came out of my supply. I made a second hand. Got some new hands for the pilot clock. The crutch was bent. Had to do some work on that. The idea on the preservation is any little damage, say there was some damage here to the escape wheel, if it doesn't affect the running of the clock, then it's historical markings and you leave it alone. I had to do a little straightening up of a few of the teeth on that, but that was it. The maker's plate was missing, and I have a competitor out on the East Coast that said that there was so many of them missing in his area that he started to reproduce them, and so I was able to get that, and I got a little story I can tell you here in a minute on how we came up with the actual serial number for the clock. The A.S. Hotchkiss was the original designer, and the guy that the Seth Thomas Company bought his business out, and he did all the designing of the tower clocks. This is going to strike here in just a second. We will show you, it will demonstrate during the strike how the winder actually works. As this thing strikes, there's going to be this lever right here will drop, and it will cause the clock to start striking, and the governor fan in the back will start spinning, and that regulates how fast the bell rings. Here we go. As this weight drops, this piece is riding right down on that shaft. What it will do is kick this motor in, which will get the motor up here going. We had our safety features on, or our bell silencer so that we didn't get any noise out of that. What happens is, as that comes up, it will cause the bell to ring. The bell is mine. It was in my supply. What I did, I tried to make all this so that it matched a lot of the original stuff in the tower. The beams are rough sawn pine beams. The hammerhead I made, and rather than making it out of steel, I made it out of maple, so that it doesn't have quite as high a pitch to the bell as what it would if it was steel on steel. I thought the people in the visitor center might get kind of tired of hearing that bell ring, and that's why I made it so that the bell can be silenced. What I did here, this is it's supposed to represent as close as possible to what you have in the tower. This rod would be 14 feet long, and these are all original universals. The gearing in the center is part of the motion works, and that is original to this clock, and it would it sat on the next floor above where the bell is. And the rest of this is mine. This is a dial gear assembly that came out of a number 4 or a street clock that is a Seth Thomas, and that universal joint. So I used those rather than yours, because yours is going to have to go back up in the tower. And then I made these hands. They're sugar pine as well, with the little brass rod and an adjustable weight on them, just like the full-size clock is. I had to do some research on this maker's plate to try to come up with a date if possible, which I knew was going to be tough to come up with that, and hopefully the serial number. And what I came up with was the serial number on this clock is a 277, was number 277. And the way I found that out through researching the Seth Thomas catalog and the order catalog, I found that about close to a year before this clock was built, Park County, Indiana, which is Rockville, Indiana, I had done a restoration on their number 16 about 15 years ago. And I should have wrote the information down on their maker's plate, but I didn't. So I called the guy that's the head of the maintenance department out there, and I said, Don, I said, I really need a favor from you. Is there anybody that I can hire out there that can go up in the tower and find the information on your maker's plate? And he said, Phil, all the things that you've done for us over the years, he says, I'm going to go up there right now. And this guy is a big guy, and he must have dropped what he was doing, because he called me back 5 minutes later, and he had that his clock was dated March the 6th, 1882. And in the book, the order date of that clock was January 31st. So it took a month and about 6 days for them, between the time that clock was ordered and when it was finished. And that was normally when they stamped these, when they finished the clock. So what we did, we went through all of the pages between their clock and ours, and I set in Hennepin County, and took out all the orders that were just for hands and dials and things like that. And it ended up there was 35 clocks that were ordered between Rockville, Indiana, and Hennepin County, Fort Snelling. So it would have made this clock number 277. The order date, so because we couldn't come up with an exact date, and someday, now that we know that this is a 277, someday this plate may show up, and if I ever come across number 277, then we'll put it on there and take this one off, because we do have circa 1882, which it probably was, it was probably finished by then, but just in case it rolled over into the next year, we did put circa, which actually means thereabouts, so we're covered on that base as well. So